Okay, we're recording. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. My name is Brittany Tuttle. I am the Teen Services Librarian here at the Wilmington Memorial Library. We are honored to have with us tonight some of Wilmington's finest educators and people I love collaborating with. It's one of my favorite parts of my job, getting to work with these teachers here tonight. So without further ado, I will briefly introduce them and then we will go ahead and get started. So joining us tonight for part 2 of our diversity, equity, and inclusion panel are Jennifer Bryson. Thank you so much for being here. Melanie Patterson. I have Maura next on my screen, Maura Tucker, Lisa Desberg, and Jaclyn Madden. So I will turn things over to Jen and get our PowerPoint started.
Thanks, Brittany. I will get started while you start to share. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here this evening. I'm Jen Bryson. I'm a faculty member in literacy and language and elementary education at BU. I'm also a Wilmington resident. And I'm happy to be here tonight with my colleagues who will share their best practices in the area of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Melanie Patterson and Brittany Tuttle, who did the part 1 series with me, we did that together, our media experts. And tonight we have a panel, Lisa Desberg, high school English teacher, Jaclyn Madden, a middle school English teacher, and Maura Tucker, a high school social studies teacher, to share their expertise and best practices. So thank you all for being here with us tonight. I'll start by talking about the session's objectives and what we're hoping will be some key takeaways for you. We also recommend that you have some paper and a pen to jot down some notes, as we might periodically stop and give you a moment to reflect. The objectives for tonight, we will continue. So those of you who are with us for part 1, you'll notice this is a continuation, but we will spend some time reviewing a little bit of part 1 before we jump in. We'll continue to rethink the media our families consume through an anti-racist lens. We'll learn about some of the work happening in our schools and have an opportunity to ask questions. We'll review and discuss problematic media and media that is getting it right. You will use what you learned here to continue the work we've started. This presentation includes 4 parts. The first part is a review of session 1, thinking about how our identities have shaped our lives and strategies for focusing on equity and inclusivity. Part 2 will include sharing of best practices in the classroom. Part 3 will focus on problematic and recommended media. And then part 4 will be some action planning for you as you continue on this journey. And with that, Melanie's going to start us off with a review of some important terms from session 1.
All right, hi everyone. So we began last time with a definition and discussion of what anti-racism is. So we defined it as being an anti-racist results from a conscious decision to make frequent, consistent, and equitable choices daily. These choices require ongoing self-awareness and self-reflection as we move through our lives. In the absence of making anti-racist choices, we unconsciously uphold aspects of white supremacy, white dominant culture, and unequal institutions in our society. Being racist or anti-racist is not about who you are, it's about what you do. And we explored our lives and how they've been shaped by our identities, by our race, our gender, our sexual orientation, and our socioeconomic status. And then we watched and learned from American children's book author and illustrator Grace Lin as she taught us about windows and mirrors and the texts we consume. And so for our purposes, the phrase mirrors and windows was initially introduced by Emily Seed for the National Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity Project. So a mirror is a story that reflects your own culture and helps you build your own identity. And a window is a resource that offers you a view into someone else's experience. And so it's critical to understand that students can't truly learn about themselves unless they learn about others as well. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Melanie. We talked in part 1 about equity and tolerance, and we described equity as the highest level of support and then tolerance as a lower level of support. We asked you to consider some of these things as you review text and media that you use with your family. These are some keys to assist you. When we talk about equity, we ask these questions. Are the voices authentic? Is the text written by someone in the community it depicts an insider? Does it have underrepresented people as the main characters who get to be the focus of the story? And then does it focus on fairness? Tolerance, and while we're striving for equity, tolerance still has a very important place in this work. Does it have, but it's some things to consider as you're comparing. Does it have token voices or no underrepresented groups? Does it present others as same as you, unusual, or exotic? Does it only portray underrepresented people as supporting characters? They get to be in someone else's story. Does it focus on getting along or learning to live together? Or does it not address any complex issues? Next, Melanie will share the need for diverse books and media. Next slide.
So when we talk about our need for diverse books, we talk about inclusivity and equity. So in terms of inclusivity, thinking about how inclusive the media that our family consumes is. Which voices, like Jen was saying, which voices are represented on our bookshelves, on the things that we watch on TV, the music that we're listening to, and thinking about what voices are missing. Thinking about in what ways do you include and how do you find multicultural titles that you read, and how inclusive is your language? Is it gendered versus non-gendered language, asset-based language versus deficit language, and your actions, encouraging children to read so-called boy and girl topics and books. And then how often do you discuss these inclusive practices with your families and your children? In terms of equity, we talked about using own voices, which is a movement that refers to an author from a marginalized or underrepresented group writing about their own experience and from their own perspective, rather than someone from an outside perspective writing as a character from an underrepresented group. So not all literature, not all books with diverse perspectives are own voices literature. Not all books featuring Black and Indigenous people of color are equal, and it can be a challenge to know what is considered a good book. So the most common advice that I give to people to avoid books of stereotypical or negative portrayals is to seek out books by authors and illustrators who share an identity with the characters in this book. So that's where the equity column in this slide is. So embracerace.org is a great resource for parents raising anti-racist children. So when you're considering equity, they offer a checklist of about 8 things to look for in the materials that you're choosing for your children. The first one being choosing a compelling book and consider your audience. So choosing a book simply because it's on a recommended book list, from my experience, makes it feel obligatory to kids. So it's got to be something that they're interested in. So good questions to ask here would be, does this book have an engaging story? Is it grabbing my kids' attention? Will children respond to the content in some way? Thinking about the genre of the book, is it a biography, an adventure, a fantasy? And does the book use meaningful topics and themes that will speak to children? Is there vivid language? Are there vivid images? And are the characters well developed? And can the book build on current levels of knowledge and experience of your child? The second thing to note would be to include books in which Black and Indigenous people of color characters are the stars. Jen had mentioned them being sort of the main character versus a supporting character in the book. So good questions to ask here would be, who is telling the story and who has the power in the story? And this matters as much as, if not more than, what other characters show up in the story. Picture books that feature a white main character with Black and Indigenous people of color as secondary or background characters can send the message that Black and Indigenous people of color are only ever incidental to the lives and experiences of white people. So data shows an increase in the amount of picture books being published that feature characters of color whose race and culture is unspecified. So for example, they would just be somebody who happens to have brown skin. And while it's okay to read books where they're racially or culturally sort of, their identifications aren't central to the story, they shouldn't be substituted for books featuring clearly identified Black and Indigenous people of color as the stars to drive the action or meaning. Scaffold your approach when you're introducing new material to your children. So if your child is young and you're just beginning this journey to expand the diversity in the books that you're reading with them, start with titles that introduce and celebrate human differences and that star Black and Indigenous people of color, their children, in their everyday situations. And when sharing stories about racism and oppression, it's important that children already have a foundation of knowledge and respect for differences. The fourth thing to consider is the experiences and expertise of the creators. So this goes back to the own voices. So whose knowledge is being drawn, who's writing the story, or the author and illustrator, you know, from whatever culture that the book is represented. If it's not an own voices book, are there notes explaining how or why the author and illustrator came to find the material? Is there a personal connection or a direct experience with the characters that they're portraying? And were members of the portrayed group involved or consulted in creation of the book? Look for books that depict positive interactions across differences. So research has shown that early and sustained exposure to these types of stories can reduce intergroup anxiety that leads to prejudice. Aim for a balanced set of portrayals. So how Black and Indigenous people of color are represented in books matter as much as who is represented. And then feel free to wear a critical lens when you're reading any book. It's not uncommon to discover that a much loved or recommended book has issues. Last time we talked a lot about, you know, books that we've read in our childhood that are now, if they were created now, they would be very problematic. So these books offer an opportunity, not saying that you don't have to read them, but they offer an opportunity to analyze the book with your children and, you know, start having these conversations. And as you're reading, point out the problems that you're finding with these books. And then finally, doing ongoing research. Talk to your librarians about diverse books, talk to your teachers about diverse books, and explore current and diverse book honorees. The American Library Association gives out several different awards every year for multicultural children's books. So those are all places to start. And that's it for this slide. That was a lot.
Thanks, Melanie. So now it's time to hear from our panel of educators. Thank you once again for being here with us this evening and for sharing your best practices and opening this opportunity up for us to ask some questions as well. So I think we'll start with Ms. Desberg. I can't not call you Ms. Desberg.
You can call me Lisa. Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Melanie. Melanie, we do need diverse books, and what you just presented was truly wonderful. I'm with you on every count. Lots of diverse books in Wilmington high school classrooms, you'd be happy to know. Usually coming out of our own pocket, but we'll talk about that. So you might look at the slide and say to yourself, Mass DESE. So DESE is the acronym for Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. That is our guide as educators. And of course, they have a whole section on their website dedicated to policies and practices with regard to this topic, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not as much curriculum-wise as initiatives or approaches or pilot programs for districts as they work to close gaps in those areas. But do know that our educator evaluation system has a category that addresses diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as we recertify every 5 years, I mean, there's always ongoing professional development, but we do have to take a foundations for inclusive practices online course through them, in addition to other PD, professional development, that's offered either through the district, through local colleges, through consortiums with regard to this topic. And then of course, right under the state, we have higher ed, and we're lucky to live in a part of the country where we have wonderful and plentiful higher ed universities and colleges that we can look to and use as resources. So there's a link to Reloading the Canon, which kind of shares some books that are not on the traditional canon that would be good for high school classrooms. Higher ed, they're constantly evaluating their curriculum through lots of lenses, and as they review that, they also reviewing their teaching and assessing methods, not just in the teacher preparation programs, but in any of the courses they offer. And they use kind of what Melanie was talking about, a checklist. They refer to it as toolkits to kind of self-assess where they're at. And of course, there are organizations that curriculum areas look to for guidance. So in the English department, it's the National Council of Teachers of English, which is the NCTE. And I linked some of their position statements that are many, 30, 40, 50 statements linked here with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion in curriculum, in instruction, in assessment. And then I believe when Maura speaks next, she'll reference some organizations that are also super helpful as resources. And then there are the good old hashtags that cull lots of different diversifying the curriculum movement through, I'll just give you disrupt text because I know Jack speaks to a few of those hashtags later that can help you find some books. And then, of course, we get right to the department. So the Wilmington High School Department has established that we really need to facilitate the implementation of inclusivity and diversity in many of our grades, but specifically 12th grade, where there is none. So this year will be year 2 of a book evaluation committee, which is focused on reading authors and protagonists who are women or people of color to expand some curricular options. We did not come to a consensus last year, and then of course the end of the year got a bit tough to make decisions, so we didn't. We surveyed everybody on the committee, but didn't come to a consensus. So informally, not part of this book evaluation committee, we read and discuss potential books on our own. And then we talk with each other at curriculum meetings or department meetings to, prevent some of our unconscious biases, which Melanie talked about, and just to challenge some assumptions. And I also, underneath the WHS department, linked the anti-bias documents and suggested resources. And there's a document with regard to family and community engagement that might interest you. And then, of course, we get down to the nitty-gritty where we see your students. And that's when the teachers are in their classrooms or they're part of the school. So you'd be happy to know that 90, just shy of 90, maybe 89, teachers took part in a district-wide book study and elevated thought discussion this summer. The MTA, Massachusetts Teachers Association, bought us the book White Fragility, and we read it. And in addition to that, we did some activities under awareness, understanding, and then action. In regard to getting these diverse books into the classroom, the money for materials for a department is a bit too small. Generally, we work on supplementing books that are lost or damaged. So teachers might go through applying for grants. I happen to link a Book Love grant that gives $2,000 to teachers to buy their own books, diverse books for the classroom. But other means, we go to thrift stores, yard sales. We ask family members to donate what they have read. And of course, sometimes we just go to Barnes & Noble and pay full price. But when that doesn't happen, we use companion pieces through, I think what Melanie was saying, through like this lens that will give broader insight into the topic, the people that should be represented that aren't necessarily. So if people at home are looking for such companion pieces, commonlit.org has free resources, and they're quite something. I've given them to my daughter, back when she was amenable to do summer work. Now it's reading and discussing, which is completely fine too. And if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A or the chat, but I'm happy to introduce my colleague and my friend, Maura Tucker, to talk to you.
Thanks, Lisa. If you've ever been in Lisa's classroom, the first thing you'll notice is the sheer amount of books that are in her room. They're all over her windowsills, just two beautiful bookcases. We're arranged in rainbow order. So my part of this presentation is about talking about mirroring student experiences in the history classroom. And just like Lisa did, I'm going to start with the frameworks. We're in our first year of a new cycle of history classes at Wilmington High School. We have completely torn up our old history curriculum and we are building a new one. It will be called World History or Global History through the American Perspective. Instead of doing 2 years of US history and a year of world history, we're trying to move towards having a history class where we're doing all of the parts of history instead of chunking it up. That way we don't teach World War I 3 times. In doing so, we've gotten to spend a lot of time with the new curriculum frameworks, which came out in 2018. Two of the most important parts, and everything starts with curriculum, right? In the new frameworks is that there's a new focus on civic education, and you can see on the screen the best practices or the common standards for all history classes and all social science classes. And a lot of those are focused on new civic engagement for students. Something that came out of that was an 8th grade required civics class for all Massachusetts students, which I'm sure Jack will talk about since she's an 8th grade teacher. And that is giving us a new lens to look at a lot of things through this refocus on point of view. So along the way, we read sources, and just like in an English class, we're doing a lot of different readings, looking at the author of those readings, looking at how their perspective is different than yours or is the same as yours, or looking at perspectives of people that we don't see. Why don't we have written sources from this group of people? Why aren't they incorporated into the curriculum? Are good places to start, and that all comes from our new curriculum frameworks. If you wanna, can you advance the slide, Brittany? So one of the other things that I really believe is a foundational element in the social studies class, to have as many perspectives as possible, to let students have those mirrors and those windows, is choice. And this is just a sample, and you'll see how wordy the social studies frameworks are. They barely fit on a slide. That this allows, the new frameworks allow for a lot of choice, a choice for teachers, choice for school districts. And when I see a list where it says, choose one of these movements, I immediately want to give that choice to students. So for this topic, for defending democracy, the Cold War, and civil rights at home, I think there's 12 foundational elements. This one is number 9, and it takes what students have learned in their study of the civil rights movement for African American rights in the United States, and it looks at the strategies that those civil rights activists learned and how that trickled down to these other groups. So you can see we have women, LGBTQ, disability rights, the movement for health and rights of workers, with Latinx organizers like Cesar Chavez, and then Native Americans as well. So there are lots of moments in the new frameworks where you can bring in these different perspectives, and people can have those moments where they have a real connection to the social studies frameworks. That's new in the new frameworks that didn't exist before. All right, can you go back up? It's weird not having my, oh no, other way. Thanks, I missed my clicker. So, there's so many opportunities in history to hear stories. And one of the challenges that we see, a little bit of pushback to changes to curriculum, is that we don't want to lose the old narrative. History doesn't really change, but how we look at it does. So one of the things that I try really hard to do, and now that we have the frameworks connecting these things, are to incorporate new perspectives into old historical narratives. One of the best examples of that in the new frameworks is the story of Bayard Rustin. He was a gay civil rights activist who worked a lot with Martin Luther King. He's actually credited for teaching Martin Luther King the principles of nonviolence, but we don't know him because his lifestyle at the time was considered controversial, so he wasn't on the forefront of the movement. But you know, as these changes happen to curriculum and as time marches on, we see a lot more. His name's actually in the frameworks right along Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Thurgood Marshall, which is awesome. In a perfect world, all of those different choices that we saw for the different groups, I mean, that sounds like an amazing elective class to me, but it would be great to talk about all of them, but having the opportunity to talk about some of them is wonderful for students. The other thing I was going to talk about was just micro versus macro changes. I follow a wonderful social worker on Instagram, and she's always talking about micro and macro changes. So micro changes are the things that you can do kind of tangibly around you every day. For me, that's trying to make my classroom the most welcoming place it can possibly be, to have really good relationships with my students. And then macro changes are advocating for curriculum changes. You know, we're constantly advocating to have facing history in ourselves put back in the curriculum in our school. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But you know, school policy changes, like changes to discipline and how we do things. We're constantly advocating for those. And then, you know, supporting legislation for more inclusive curriculum choices. Having that 8th grade curriculum focus on civics was a grassroots campaign that happened, and that became a law, and now we're seeing that this is the first year of the class. And then last but not least, and I could talk for days, as I think a couple of my students are on, can tell you, are 2 amazing organizations that give free resources to teachers and to parents. The first is Teaching Tolerance. I know before the beginning of the presentation, we had talked about tolerance kind of being step 1 in that equity scale, but Teaching Tolerance really is an organization that advocates for equity. It's run by the Southern Poverty Law Center, and you can get the most amazing resources. You know, they are geared towards teachers, but there's nothing there that a parent couldn't use to read through with a student. If you want to skip down 2 slides, Brittany. So this is a picture from my classroom. The poster sets are from Teaching Tolerance, and you can get 4 free posters a year for a teacher. They also have them all to print on your own, so you can print them 8 by 10 from your wonderful color printers. They have professional development opportunities, the curriculum resources. They have a wonderful set of documentaries and resources that go with film. I use A Time for Justice a lot in my classroom with my American history students, and tells the story of the civil rights movement, highlighting some lesser known activists. They also have an amazing curriculum that goes with Selma, if you saw the film. And then the other organization is Facing History in Ourselves, which is headquartered in Brookline, Massachusetts. Ms. Desberg and I are not only facing history teachers, but we're also facing history students. So that's how long the organization has been in existence. Their goal is to have students see what's happening currently and trace its historical roots, and see how that comes from a history of struggle and injustice, and then make changes in your daily life that could alleviate those struggles and injustices. They also have free PD and resources. You can get a download copy of their textbook for free from the website. And hopefully we'll see it running again in the future. We'll get our social justice activists involved and giving them some tools to make some real changes. And I'm handing it over to Jaclyn Madden, who's an 8th grade teacher at the middle school. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. It is so exciting and not at all anxiety-inducing and terrifying to be here talking to you. So I am an 8th grade English teacher at the middle school level. I don't know much about what's going on in the social studies classroom in terms of civics because they're just getting started on that, though I know that they talked about the election a ton. And I know that they're going to be talking about immigration, which is a big topic in 8th grade ELA as well. So I'm excited to collaborate with the social studies teachers teaching this new, I had no idea that it was a grassroots campaign to get this new civics curriculum going. So that's awesome. So I'm here to talk to you all about how I incorporate and promote equity, diversity, and inclusion in my classroom, and also how I've started to incorporate it more in my home and day-to-day life now that I'm the happy mom of a toddler who is just soaking up all information like a sponge. So the first thing that I think is probably the most important thing that I do in my classroom is build relationships with my students. I have, safe space stickers on my door. I have flags around my room for pride. But more than that, I hope that I demonstrate to my students through my words and my actions and my curricular choices that I value who they are. Day one, I work really hard to learn how to pronounce all of my students' names. I ask them what pronouns they use, and I actually use them. And I advocate for them with my colleagues as well. Our students need to know that they're valued as humans in order to have these open and honest conversations with us, especially in an English language arts classroom, which is so discussion-based, because students are learning who they are as middle schoolers. Identity is such a huge part of the middle school social emotional learning experience. 8th grade also has major units on immigration, like I mentioned before, as well as literature from the Holocaust. So without having these really strong relationships with students, and without students having trust in me and one another and themselves, we're never going to be able to have these important conversations that they need to start having as they start to learn more about their worlds. In addition to that, exposure is super important. So not only in whole class texts, but also in their independent reading choices. I know that Lisa and I both do SSR, or silent or self-sustained reading, where students get to choose what they are reading. But in doing that, we can sort of nudge them along to texts that we think would interest them, but also could be exposing them to people with different experiences, particularly people from marginalized groups whose voices are rarely centered in literature, even today. So Melanie, I believe, already talked about mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors today, but also in the previous panel. But it's so important, especially for students in Wilmington from these marginalized groups, to be able to see themselves, but also for all of the other students to see that people from diverse backgrounds can and should be the protagonists of stories as well. So this is something that benefits all students, not just students who are from those marginalized groups. So another way that I promote exposure to EDI is just by having books all over my classroom, as it sounds like Lisa also does. So there are books on display, and I don't know, we probably have thousands of books in our classroom, so we have to choose the ones that we want to be prominently on display. And I always choose books with protagonists who are Black, Latinx, Asian, LGBTQ, protagonists with disabilities, mental illnesses, so that students are exposed to these different protagonists. All of these marginalized perspectives deserve to be centered, so students can find themselves and others in these books. And then one new thing that a lot of middle school teachers are doing this year is exposing students to just the first chapters of books so that they can kind of get hooked on a book and want to continue reading it. So in doing that, myself and Miss McGonigal will choose 4 books per month, and we'll read the first chapters of those. And students can choose to read which one of those, but we choose books that have diverse voices in them. In that way, we're putting these texts into the students' hands, and we can tell them, you know, well, this book is about an 8th grader who's obsessed with basketball, but it's also told from the perspective of a Black boy, and it's also written in verse. Like, don't you want to read that? That's so cool. Or, you know, this book it takes on a futuristic spin, and people are told, you know, on the day that they're going to die that they have 24 hours to live, but it also features racial diversity, and there's LGBTQ representation at the same time. So it's hooking them with something that they're comfortable with while also exposing them to diverse perspectives at the same time. The other teachers have already talked a lot about how EDI is embedded in the curriculum, so I'll just touch on that a little bit. So every year we try and add more and more representation to the 8th grade canon. But it's also important that we're giving students the essential context of the text that we teach, both in fiction and in nonfiction. So we should be asking those questions that have already been spoken about in this panel, you know, and encouraging students to do so independently as well. Like, whose voices are present, whose voices are centered, whose voices are amplified through a text, which characters have agency in the text, and whose voices are missing from the text, as Maura spoke about. For years, I taught this unit on immigration, and I centered the experiences of people who immigrated through Ellis Island, because 3/4 of Americans today can trace their lineage through Ellis Island. And I hate myself for even having done this, but I completely omitted the experiences of Asian and Pacific Islanders who came through Angel Island and who had horrific experiences coming through. So students need to know that we are fallible, and we are always upgrading and updating our curriculum. And they also really need to know that history is not homogenously white. So just because they might be able to trace their history through one place, their peers might be able to trace it through someone else, some other place, and that's also valid and important to know about. So yeah, that brings me to my last point, that this is an ongoing learning experience, and it's important to keep learning, to not be complacent. We're all learning, we're all pushing ourselves to do better day by day, and that's exactly what we're asking our students to do, right? So we need to be okay with knowing, and with others knowing, that we're fallible, that we make mistakes, and that we move on, and that's how we learn. And obviously ongoing learning is a part of my job as a professional. Lisa talked about professional development and how we have to, but it's also important for families at home to be choosing to learn more about these topics, like attending panels such as this. So I encourage you to follow hashtags like We Need Diverse Books, and follow authors of color, you know, on Twitter and other social medias. The author network on Twitter is unreal. I always tell my students, like, if you want to reach out to an author of a book that you're reading, they will probably tweet you back. Like, they are all over the place. And having that opportunity for connection can really open up new worlds for these kids too, and make them excited about reading and learning. So that is what I encourage you to do. And if you can go to the next slide, Brittany, please. I can show you some of my favorite books that feature diverse voices. So the first 3 are about protagonists who have mental illnesses. The middle books all feature and are written by authors of color. And then the 2 last books center on LGBTQ community members. I also wanted to encourage you, if you have, you know, an hour here or there, to watch 2 other webinars that I found just amazing. One was in June, I believe. Yeah, June 4th. It was the Kidlit Rally for Black Lives. I included a link there for you to watch it, but you can also just YouTube Rally for Black Lives. That had a bunch of YA authors of color who read some original works, read excerpts from their own writing, and just talked to teenagers and middle schoolers about Black Lives Matter. And also the more recent one was a call and response, which was a Q&A with the youngsters, which was amazing on October 30th. Oh, and the Rally for Black Lives one, the one that's on the left there, an hour of that was also directed to parents and educators. So that would be a great thing to watch as well. And that's all I got for you.
Thank you all so much. It's awesome. I know all of this, but it's so great to hear you all put it together. And for those who are watching and listening, to know that all of this is happening within their children's classrooms is really exciting. And we're so happy that you were able to be here with us. So I'm going to see if there are any questions. I said we might stop here if anyone had any questions or wanted to add something to the chat before we go into another piece, just so that we can we don't pass over anything. Brittany, I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, I don't think. Nope. I'm happy to wait just a minute if anyone wants to ask the teachers a question, or we can come back to that as well at the end. This is reminiscent of my Zoom classes. I say hello, anyone out there? All right, well, I know they will definitely add some before the end. Thanks, Lish. All right, so Lish says, what kind of pushback does the new history perspective teaching get? I think that's for you, Maura.
I have definitely heard from parents who were unhappy with the changes to the new curriculum. You know, before we had these standards, it was kind of like I'm talking about them and I didn't have the documents behind me. I just wanted to include different perspectives in my classroom and give kids an opportunity to see different things and hear different people. You know, with the changes to the Massachusetts curriculum frameworks, we have a little bit more standing in that big, thick document to say that, you know, groups of educators from all over the state, elected representatives got together and they wrote this document, and this is how we're going to guide our learning. There'll always be pushback, but now I can kind of say, well, you can contact your state legislature representatives to talk to them about changes to the frameworks. And I always come back with, you know, we live in a democracy. You have the right to ask questions, and so do your students. And but this is our curriculum. This is what we wrote. This is what's been approved. But I definitely hear from a couple of parents every year. And I just once again say to them, like, my goal is to give your kids as much choice and agency in what they want to do in my classroom as possible. If they want to pick a different topic, you know, that's up to them and up to you. But I'm here to support them if they want to learn something else too. I think the other question was about history curriculum too. Very exciting. I'm happy that people want to talk about history curriculum.
Thank you. I think you got to the other question too. So
Okay.
Thank you. All right. So I just have one question related to this, but how have you seen students change in recent years? Have you seen a change in how they sort of receive the curriculum or the choice in what they're able to read or how they present what they've learned? Have you noticed any more agency or any change in students over the last few years?
I'll pipe up, Jen, and just with two anecdotal stories that came to my head. Two students, very unlikely friends, but classmates, both read the book that was centered around the Sandy Hook shootings. I can't remember the title, and this was for self-sustained reading, and Jack and I said that is very important in the beginning of the class, because sometimes they will shirk their responsibility to read the given curriculum because it's not as interesting, or it might be typical when you tell a student or a teen at home to do something, they're less likely to than when they choose. So these two particular students read that book. And of course, I would say every 3 months we gather to talk a little bit in an informal way, and they maybe have 7 talking points. They can just focus on 3. So they had a moment, and that was very unusual, but they oftentimes connect themselves to the text. So of course you can connect it to another text, the world, themselves. And it was, yes, it was Newtown, an American Tragedy. Thank you. And they both happened to read the same one. They purchased them on their own. And they both started to talk about how, what type of mental illness runs in their family, why that matters, if it's talked about, and so on and so forth. And it was quite amazing. So in that sense, when you give them the safe space to learn about and discover and talk about issues that are really difficult and maybe so close to home, that it's a bit more comforting to do so in a book, in a classroom where it's valuable to talk about hard things, even especially when they're true and tragic and horrific. So that's one kind of what I'm seeing, how I see students react. And then this last one just happened last year. I have a very reluctant reader. I hate reading, I can't read. And he read a book I think Jack referenced. It was All American Boys, a big time award winner, just won 4 books by Jason Reynolds. And I think he may have co-wrote it with somebody else, because he usually does. Or at least sometimes he does. And he admitted he didn't read a book until he was 17. And then, of course, he's a published author and a bigwig right now. He was on 1 or 2 of those panels. And he said, this student held up that book at the end and he said, I finished a book. This is the first book I ever remember finishing. And I liked it. And I want to share it with other people. And I was like, yeah, because you can just read a book, the right one, not the one that you've been, pushing back on. So I guess what I'm seeing is that it's very easy to pick up your phone and scroll through a lot of pictures, maybe some text, but if you give them some time and you nudge them in the right direction, as was mentioned, and you have the books available so they don't have to buy it and figure out which one or talk to somebody. I mean, I do the talking with Brittany all the time, and then I read the books and then I kind of know. So it's diverse authors for sure, and diverse characters, but it's also just getting them 10 minutes to read and then realize like, oh, that's the skill that will last my whole life, not the note taking on your grammar lesson. So thanks for letting me at least share 2 ways I'm seeing students appreciate reading.
And to piggyback on that, Lisa, I've found that when you give students like the entire class library and you say, yeah, pick a book, some kids are going to be able to do that. They'll gravitate towards the authors that they know or the genres that they know. But once you have built that trust and that relationship with the students, for you to say like, here's so-and-so, I think that you would really like this book. Like, for them to know that you know them enough to make that recommendation, I've found has been so valuable as well. Like, they trust you and they want to talk to you about the book as they read it. So that's also why I try to nudge those diverse books. Like, I've read it too, we can talk about it. I think that you would really like it.
I have a social studies for the sophomores. They have a year-long research project. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's called the sophomore research paper. And it instills fear in the heart of all sophomores. But, one of the most popular topics when I started doing this 19 years ago was tattooing in America. That was the #1 topic chosen for the sophomore research papers, along with like the mafia. And that's what kids really wanted to learn about. But now, over the course of the last couple of years, I see way more kids writing about Black Lives Matter, about Colin Kaepernick and his decision to protest and that effect. The Stonewall riots, Dorothea Dix, and how she changed how we look at mental illness and how we treat mental illness. So in that, giving those kids choices and like just exposing them even a little bit more, they get to pick things that they want to learn about. The sophomore research paper is a much more valuable topic. It's a much more valuable project when they're connected to it, because they want to reference their authors and they want to cite their sources and they want to talk about the primary source they read to prove their thesis. And that's just like about as good as it gets in a history class for a history teacher. So I think exposing them to those topics has meant better research papers too.
Great, thank you so much. And so all of our teachers tonight have said, I think, the word safe space, and talked a lot about creating spaces where our children, our teens feel comfortable, feel seen, feel known. And so last time in August, Melanie, Brittany, and I shared problematic books. We talked through books that maybe you thought were okay, but you should probably look at it a little bit more critically. And we went through a few of those. Tonight, we're going to share media that is problematic. And then as we were all planning, rehearsing this week, we started talking about there's so much out there that is problematic that we see all the time. And once you start looking around you critically with issues of equity in your mind, it's almost like you see it everywhere you go. But you also see media that's getting it right. And you notice those changes over time, from something as simple as going to order your cards on Shutterfly or Snapfish and noticing that the families that they're showing in each aren't all white heterosexual family. Like, you're seeing differences, you're seeing it highlighted, you're seeing so much more diversity just when you start to pick up on it. You're like, oh, this is exciting. And so we had a little conversation among us that was like, there's actually a lot that is going in the right direction, and we wanted to share some of that as well. So we have 2 slides. One is sort of this is stuff that's around us and current, and we want to be thinking about it so that when we see it, we talk with ourselves and our colleagues and our friends, and also we talk with the children in our lives to say, oh, geez, what do you think about that? And those of you that are doing that know that the conversations you have with children who are so critical and who are surrounded by such rich educators and education, like, they'll say, yeah, I noticed that a long time ago. Like, I have that conversation with my kids all the time. I'll say, ooh, did you notice in that catalog? And they're like, yeah, it's a big problem, Mom. And I'm like, okay. Like, so it's really exciting, I think, to look at something and then have a real critical conversation with your kids about it, or your children. So that's next slide, Brittany. So there were a lot, actually. I think I had initially 4 slides with multiple images on each thing. And I said, we'll cut this down, but please reach out if you want to talk through more of these. But these are just a couple of examples. And so I sort of have described underneath, so I won't read exactly what I've written there. But a birthday cake for George Washington, we actually did talk about that in August. Melanie shared a little bit about that, the story of portrayed slaves as happily preparing a cake for George Washington, and why that was so problematic. And so that one is up there. May 2014, we have it's Cinco de Mayo, and this is what was on the morning news. We can see why that would be problematic and culturally insensitive. Over here on the right, so now I just got my Target catalog today or a couple of days ago, and you sort of think we're moving in the right direction, but this is almost seems like it's not, right? It's quite gendered. And so the study actually says that we are showing more toys are becoming more gendered than a decade ago, which is mind-boggling to me. But here are just 2 recent images of what the boy would choose and what the girl would choose, and sort of the messages that this sends to our kids. You can see it starts so early, and so kids are very aware of what these norms that the media is putting out there. And so it's our job as the adults in their life to say, ooh, what do you think of that, right? And then to have kids push back, maybe write a letter to the editor, maybe write a letter and say, like, you not only should we be critical about it, but then we should actually advocate a bit. And we should say, hey, have you considered Target maybe changing this up a little bit? I think that it gives kids a voice, and they have a chance to say, oh, wait a minute, I don't just have to sit back and say, oh, that's not good, but I can actually say, ooh, maybe we should do something about that. And then finally, we have, as many of you have seen and we've talked about, local high school mascots. So this is one not too far from us, and you might, changes are coming, and you'll notice around the state and around the country that this has been certainly a discussion topic, but something to keep your eye on. And I think to make sure that they won't change overnight, but I think to have honest conversations with your children and with the kids in your life about what that represents and why that is insensitive and racist. And so next slide. But look at this. These are some of the things that we could just go on and talk about. And there were more. There were so many more positive messages that we as adults and our children are receiving about race, gender, class, sexual orientation, and language. We just broke it down. Melanie and I broke it down into just different categories. So here on the left, we've got some primary suggestions. Then we have some middle, and then off to the right are more kind of the high school suggestions. Although, you know, caregivers know their kids best, so you can make the best choices. Melanie,
Can I just jump in here, because like this is just scratching the surface of the books and the TV shows that are actually getting it right. commonsensemedia.org, bookmark it. Seriously, bookmark it no matter how old your child is, from toddler up through high school. They recommend TV shows, they recommend books, they recommend video games, they recommend anything you can think of. If you're looking for something for your child, they will tell you the age appropriate, you know, how old the child is that should be consuming it. They give you honest reviews. They also put together blog posts and articles about things like TV shows that are getting it right for equity and diversity. So,
and Melanie, I added the link there.
Perfect.
For that website. So
yeah.
This will go up, and then you'll have access to all these links that everyone has shared with you. And we highly recommend checking that out. And if you haven't checked some of these series out,
they're
Netflix,
phenomenal.
It's just, I mean, some of these streamings are doing a great job, and it's what a difference from, I would say, even 3 years ago, but I'll say 5, right? I mean, I just think we are making such great improvements, but it is up to us to engage in that, right? To say, wait, have I read a book by that author yet? Oh, I haven't. Like, it's so easy to get caught up in, but I wanted to show them this because this was my favorite. And then to sort of develop new favorites together, I think has been a really wonderful part of all that has been coming out. And of course, you know, quarantine certainly led to lots of streaming. So we got to engage in all of these, but these were just some of our favorites that came up during our rehearsal this week. So,
and the more we consume this media and show these, you know, publishers and production companies and stuff, I don't know how it works with non-books, that we are invested in this and we're interested in this, the more they're going to
provide it,
give voice to these people.
And I just have to give like an extra plug to the Babysitters Club, because as a child of the 80s who read literally every single one of those books, sitting down with my youngest child, she's 9, to watch this series, oh, my heart just like grew 3 sizes. It was amazing. Please watch it.
Yeah, I have been watching it, and every episode I am just so, I should actually just write to them, because I'm so happy and so grateful that they are really representing so well. I mean, and at first when I heard, I was like, the Babysitters Club, oh, those books, I can't, you know, and then I was like, oh my goodness. So it really is, it is great. And, you know, our hope is to encourage all of us to view all that we consume with a critical eye and use it as a teaching point, not just with our children, but with ourselves, right? If we want to see change, we need to first identify the problem. So we can't make change if we don't say, oh, wait a minute, that's not okay. And then when we see stuff that comes out, to recommend it to other people, but also to have those really honest conversations. And it just make me think about, you know, just bookstores and libraries, and, you know, Brittany and Melanie can certainly talk about how those books are ordered and what gets taken out. But if they don't get taken out, they don't they don't stay on the shelves for long, right? And so I've been saying this to families for a long time. We need to really make sure that we're borrowing those books, because that just, it says a lot about who we are as a community. And it also helps the library to continue ordering diverse books. So I'll put that in as one more plug. You want to, I'm not the media specialist, but if you want to add anything else, please do. All right.
Type this in the chat, but I'll just say Brittany has been a true rock star these past 3-4 years. From the moment she came to Wilmington Memorial Library, you can tell me how long ago that was. She has gotten 5 years, okay, she has gotten every single book I've needed into my students' hands, and she never gets mad when they never come back on time. Or at all, but usually on time.
Yeah, I'll echo that. As an educator, so I teach literacy courses at BU, so I'm constantly in the library, and Brittany, Barbara, what do I do? How do I choose? You know, I'm just to have such that resource at your fingertip. I mean, it is just, so I hope you're not flooded with but I think we'd be thrilled, right, if you were flooded with families asking. And the same thing with, I mean, the teachers and the school librarians, like reaching out and say, hey, what do you think of this? Or how do I engage my child in this? I think we have such expertise and such masterful people around us in our community. We are really so very lucky. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You want to move on to slide 4?
Sure. So I think in the interest of time, I can just gloss over most of these. We just have some things for you to keep in mind here. These were things that the library's anti-racism planning subcommittee, program planning and resources subcommittee identified as things, our goals, and that we also thought were important for this presentation. So keep thinking about what you will do in the short term to be more equity focused, and in the long term to support Wilmington as it becomes more equity focused. So here are some short-term goals. And you can find more ideas on our anti-racism resource webpage. That will be up, and we will keep adding to it and sharing it. It's a living document that will be there for you. So let's see. Some other long-term goals. So racism interruption, I think, is really something that I am working on myself to do, and keeping myself as an active member in the fight against racism. So some books that I have for you are these. So this was difficult for me. I was trying to come up with a list of books for everyone by grade, but it was just an enormous list. I think 2020 has really been a great year for diversity, equity, and inclusion in children's literature. I'm looking forward to the Lee and Lowe study that will tell me if my perceptions are correct. So I'll be looking out for that. But in the meantime, here are some books that have come out just this year that I wanted to highlight. And I've chosen these because of the authors of these books, or illustrators in the elementary school category. These are maybe authors or illustrators that you might not know in your house. Jason Reynolds and New Kid by Jerry Craft are, I think it's wonderful that everyone loves those books. And I feel like a lot of people I encounter at the library know about those authors already, but here are some that maybe don't know about yet. I've hyperlinked all of these covers to our catalog so you can place holds on them directly. There's a summary there for you to look at, even a page count. Don't ask me where I'm from specifically. Burlington Library hosted this author, and it's a shorter book, it's a quick read. And I think sometimes that's appealing to students. So I really wanted to include that one. The Black Friend on Being a Better White Person. That book is actually not out yet. And it's going to be a runaway bestseller. Some of the other teen librarians that I know, it's been very nice to get in touch with them, you know, during the work from home period, and when I can't go to conferences, they've been a great network. So anyone out there who doesn't live in Wilmington, or maybe you teach in a different school district, please talk to your local teen librarian and me. But they are happy to help you. So one of the teen librarians, Rachel from Haverhill, hello Rachel, noticed that the Black Friend on Being a Better White Person has the biggest on order inventory that she's ever seen for a book, which is so exciting that this title is being ordered and going to be in schools and public libraries and homes, and really looking forward to it. So here are some other books here for you to look at, and you know, keep a lookout for these authors, especially Case and Calendar. Case and Calendar has books for every age level, and they are just an author everyone should know about. Oh, so this brings us to our last slide. So I see that we have another question in the chat, so I will go in there and look at those. So Lisa, yes, Angie Thomas books are wonderful. Oh, more than Angie Thomas books. Yes, Lisa, I believe so, even more than Angie Thomas books. That's the author of The Hate U Give, on the come up. This book is also a Candlewick book, and Candlewick is our local publisher in Somerville, which is really exciting. So, let's see, were there any, this is a great time if you have any last questions or finishing thoughts to get those in the chat, in the Q&A.
Yeah, please feel free to some questions in the Q&A or into the chat before we go. We have till about 8:30. I think we've reserved everybody in the Zoom room till 8:30. So we are here to answer questions. I'll just put out, I do wanted to just say a humongous thank you to our presenters tonight, and also to our attendees. Thank you for being here. I think that if you are not on the Wilmington Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Facebook page, I would highly recommend joining that group. It's a group that does just really great work. I think some of them, the board of directors are here tonight. Actually, I see some of them here. So thank you for being here. They're doing lots of just fantastic work. And most recently, you may have seen, if you're on that page, they are getting some donations to do a diverse book basket at the Festival of Trees in Wilmington, which is going to be a virtual festival this year, which is another fundraiser for Wear One Wilmington. And the donations have just been pouring in, and it just, we are overwhelmed and thrilled. Not overwhelmed, please keep sending them. I don't mean overwhelmed that way. I mean just overwhelmed with joy. Those of us that have been working in this group for some time now, it's really exciting to see such a deep commitment by the community members. So look for that, and of course buy your raffles and try and win a beautiful basket or maybe two of diverse books. And then a huge thank you to the library. I just can't get over the work you've done in the past few months. I mean, despite all that this country has gone through, and COVID, and the work has been just so incredibly important and has not stopped. And the collaboration with other libraries, I'm really just so thrilled to have this chance to work with you. So please extend just our gratitude, Brittany, to the library and the team who's been really working hard on this. I know it's been just really a tireless commitment.
Well, we thank you so much for being here tonight and spending even more of your day on Zoom We really appreciate you, and we're thinking of you and your students this year, and we hope if there's anything we can do to support you and your classrooms, your students, you'll let us know. It's been sad not to see you as often, for sure, but thank you so much for being here tonight. We definitely love working with you and your students. And I love this heartwarming interaction in the chat with Superintendent Brand and the teachers. That's really nice. I love it. So thank you, Superintendent Brand. We're excited about the strategic plan that includes inclusivity too. Oh, let's see. Well, unless I'm mistaken, I am not seeing any more questions in the chat or Q&A. I know there was a hand raised earlier. If you are still having your question, please feel free to put it in the chat or Q&A. Otherwise, I am sure the teachers would like a chance to maybe catch up on a book or get off Zoom for a little bit. I'm sure I'm not the only one who had to buy UV, or what are those glasses that help with eye strain? Yes. Let's see. Oh, the chat box. There we go. Let's see. Oh, thank you so much. We have lots of thank yous coming in from the chat. Thank you so much for being here tonight, attendees. Oh, thank you, Phyllis and Dana and Lish. Thank you. Oh, and then there's, oh my goodness, there's more. There's more. All right. Well, Jen, teachers, if there's anything else before we wrap up for this evening, please let me know. Otherwise, I think we will say good night. And thank you all so much. And please let us know if you have any questions. Everyone's contact information is here. I promise I will clean up these slides a little bit before we post them on the website. That was me. The formatting was a PowerPoint issue. I'm so sorry, teachers. But everything will be there for you along. So the PowerPoint slides, a recording of tonight's webinar will be available on our website, on our YouTube channel, and I will try to also send it to you as a link to our website because the files will be very large. All right. Oh, thank you, Andrea. So thank you, everyone, and we will end there.
Awesome. Thank you, Brittany, and thank you, Jen, for getting this started. This has been a great experience, so thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.
Night, Brittany. Thank you
Good night, Jen. Thank you so much.
so much.